Howdy guys and gals, I'm Kyle Broderick. Welcome to The Social Regressive. A while back I released a video showing my buddies and I out hunting in southern Oklahoma for hogs. This is the rifle that I took out, the CMMG Mark III DTR2. And with this, I was able to hit a running sow at 400 yards. She wasn't running away, she wasn't even really quartering away, she was mostly running sideways. So that's a pretty difficult shot going on right there. And what I wanted to do is explain how I was able to make that shot, which was not a fluke. I took 3 shots at that running sow. The first one, I think, missed. I believe the second one hit her in the backside, and then the final one was just right through the boiler room and took her down like that. And to be able to get those 2 shots on her running, yeah, it's not an accident. That was definitely a planned shot. And it's the kind of planning that comes from a lot of work. So what I have here is a list of all the steps that it took to get the rifle, the ammunition, the data, to get it ready for that kind of shot. Those of you that are interested in precision rifle shooting, those of you that might be interested in this kind of hunting, I think you'll be interested to hear this whole list of what it took to make this happen, just so you can see the kind of work that needs to go on behind the scenes. And maybe you don't have to do everything that I did. Maybe you don't have to hand load. Maybe you can work with just ammunition that you buy off the shelf, because there are some really good ones out there. And 2 that I might recommend, if you do have some kind of precision 6.5 Creedmoor rifle, take a look at the American Eagle 140 grain open tip match. Yes, it's probably about the cheapest 6.5 Creedmoor ammo that you can find out there, but it's also really good. That's what I use to shoot clay pigeons at 650 yards. It's no slouch. And then I've also been able to test out the Federal Gold Medal Berger. Those are 130 grain bullets. Some of the rifles I shot didn't like it. This one really did. The CMMG Mark III DTR2, quite like that stuff. And I'll put some links to those products down below if you want to go check those out. So yeah, if you want to shoot those, you can skip over some of these steps. But for me, I want as much precision as I can crank out of my rifle, and for me, that's hand loading. And we're going to talk about what actually happened here, because I did end up with some really smoking ammunition. So before we jump into this, I just wanted to thank the patrons of the Destructive Arts for keeping the lights on around here, making these videos possible. If anybody else wants to chip in $1 or $2 a month, I'll put a link to Patreon around here somewhere. Thank you to CMMG, Warren, and Bushnell for donating some of the gear that we were playing with here. Some of this has to go back, but I've been really happy to play with these and to test them in all the various scenarios that we've been doing, because I have a massive playlist of videos with this rifle. We've done all kinds of challenges. Let's jump in now. This is the bullet that I selected. This is kind of the first step in figuring out my hand loads. I wanted a bullet that I thought would be very precise, one that I could afford to shoot, and one that should have pretty good terminal performance. And what I ended up with is the Hornady 140 grain BTHP match bullet. So this is one that's not really designed for hunting, but those of you that know anything about the kind of hollow point match bullets that are out there that the military is using, they work anyway. They have some very good terminal ballistic performance, where they tend to tumble through game or through ballistic gel or whatever. They still tend to work pretty well. And we're going to verify that here as we get through these steps. So once I had selected the bullet, I had a bunch of cases left over from some factory ammunition that I had shot. These are Federal Champion cases, which actually turned out to be pretty consistent. What I did is I took a couple of these and I weighed them on a scale. I'm using the RCBS Chargemaster Light Charger slash scale back here. And what I did is I weighed each one beforehand and then filled them up to the very top with water that had a little bit of detergent in it to keep the water surface tension from bubbling up or bubbling down or whatever, so it just filled to the top of the case. And from that I was able to figure out how much water these actually displaced, because that's information that's usable in my Quick Load software. Quick Load is super slick. I highly recommend it for those of you that are going to be doing some hardcore reloading. If you enter the right amount of data, including your bullet seat depth, your bullet lengths, what capacity your case actually has, what powder you're working with, you can figure out your max charges and come up with some pretty quick estimates of what kind of load you're going to need for your ammunition. It works just really well. I highly recommend it. For this, once I had that capacity, I entered all the data into the software, and one of the things that I had to know was the bullet overall length, or the cartridge overall length. So that's going to be from the base all the way up to the tip here. And for that, I needed to know bullet length, so I had to measure bullets. And I also had to know how long I could seat this in this rifle. Since this is really defined by the length of the magazine, I had to stick with an overall length of 2.820 inches. And that's what you're looking at right here. This is going to fit in the mag, and it's going to fit neatly in the chamber. It's going to be quite a bit off the lance. I think it's about 40 thousandths. But yeah, that turned out to be a good length. The powder that we're working with, this is the one that I selected beforehand. This is Reloader 16, which by all accounts is the new contender versus Varget. I've been using Varget for a very long time. It's a good temperature insensitive powder, and it has all kinds of goodies in it to help keep the total flash down and to prevent copper buildup and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, this one has all kinds of goodies in it, and it's supposed to be performing very well no matter what the temperature is. And in my own testing, I can prove that out. This performs very consistently out, up closer to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and then also in some cold weather as well. Powder works great, and this whole charge worked out really well. So yeah, once I had that, plugged it all into quick load, it gave me a powder, a kind of a max pressure that I could get from my powder. And then from there, I just worked my way back. And what I chose is the optimal charge weight method. I'm going to put a link down probably here on the screen and then down in the description box to a description of the optimal charge weight method and how to make it happen. This is a little bit different than your typical ladder loads, where you just, you start at a low pressure and then you go up by a half a grain or 0.2 grains or something, and then you try to find your smallest group. It's based on case capacity and a percentage of it, and then you kind of work your way up until you find a load that not only is tight, but that has a kind of position on your target that indicates that it's kind of working its way in toward a central point. It's a little bit different way of doing things, and yes, it works out well because this is very well optimized for the rifle. If you get one of these built out, it's going to perform very well no matter what the external conditions are, whether it's hot, cold, warm, whatever. It should work out really well. And yes, that did indeed happen. So then once I had a whole series of charges worked out, I did have to get this rifle sighted in, of course. So I went out and I just had to do a bore sight. You don't need any special equipment to do a bore sight. Just look through the barrel, get it pointed at a target, get it stable on sandbags or something, and then make sure that the scope is aligned, crank it to the appropriate point, and then start taking your shots and fix it as you go along. So I did that with the sighter shots, and then worked my way up to my optimal charge weight, which turned out to be about somewhere between, I think, half MOA and 0.6. I'll show the target here on the screen. So yeah, very precise and with pretty low standard deviations of velocity. Not as low as I got with the Savage Stealth Evolution, but still more than enough for what we were after. So yeah, I got my group sizes, I chronographed my velocities. As I was shooting those targets, I was actually shooting the bullets over a chronograph so that I could get my exact velocities. And from that I could see what kind of spread I was getting between velocities with some of those charges. And that part of that goes into figuring out which group I want to do. I definitely want one with the lowest standard deviations of velocity as I can, but I also do want my small group sizes as well. You're kind of working with competing factors, and sometimes you just kind of have to make a compromise decision. But this one worked out quite well. Another good reason to know your velocities is, of course, when you actually make your ballistic chart, it's all going to be based on the ballistic coefficient of your individual bullet and the actual muzzle velocity that you're getting out of it. So it'll be able to correctly predict how much drop you're going to get at distance, and you can work out your windage and your target speeds as well. This is a pretty complex ballistic chart that I put together. I used, I believe it's the shooterscalculator.com. It's a very nice piece of software that kicks out just a neat little chart that you can actually copy and put into Excel. And in my case, I did have to tweak it some. It definitely had good elevation data, and it had a good windage data. But in order to fill out this chart the way that I needed, I had to run it quite a few times. Because first off, I have multiple winds on here, everything from 3 miles an hour up to 30 miles an hour, because yes, here in Oklahoma, it's very windy. And sometimes I do have to shoot in those crosswinds. Reference the 1,450 yard shoot that I did with the Savage Axis Project rifle in a 30 mile an hour 90-degree crosswind. That was a brutal shoot, but because we did have this data, we were able to make that shot. So yeah, this is what my charts typically look like. It's very small print. One of the things that I also add, in addition to all of the other windage information, and this chart does go all the way out to 1,800 yards, because this cartridge is actually good out to a mile as tested. One of the things that I tack on here is target speed. I knew that I was going to be hunting with this rifle and with this particular load up. So what I did is, at the various ranges, I know how much lead I need to put on a target in order to hit it. And in this case, I'm looking at a speed of 40 miles an hour with a hog. If that hog is indeed running just straight crossways and going flat out, they can go 40 miles an hour. And so this is the data that I use on the shop. We'll talk about that later. Before going out hunting, I did take this rifle and its excellent ammunition out in a series of challenges, and it gave me a chance to really figure out the rifle, realize that it was both precise and reliable in all kinds of situations. I'm going to put a link to the full playlist down below, because it's a big playlist of things that we were able to do with this. We're talking about long range shooting, speed shooting, moving target shooting, which was a whole lot of fun. Make sure you check out those videos. But that gave me a lot of confidence in this platform. The build that you see right here worked out extremely well. For stability out front, this is the UTG Recon Flex M-LOK bipod. This forearm right here is M-LOK, and there really aren't many M-LOK kind of base standard bipods for this. You have to get adapters or something, and I didn't want to start tacking adapters onto this forearm, and I wanted something that would just be more stable than usual. So I grabbed this, and you might think that UTG products, since they're relatively inexpensive, aren't any good. No. This thing is excellent. This is an extremely stable platform overall, and a lot of that does come down to this bipod. It just sits in it. It kind of cradles inside the bipod, and once you've lined up on a shot, the rifle does not move. Somewhere between the weight of the rifle, the steadiness of the bipod, it is extremely stable, especially for the long-range shooting. Up here, we have a Warren X-Scale 20 MOA mount. So this does have some compensation built into it. This is the 34mm model. I have a 30 as well, and I highly recommend these. This worked out very well. It returns to zero if you have to remove the scope or anything. And then, of course, also highly recommended the Bushnell HDMR2. This scope is my favorite. It might be about to be displaced by the XRS2 scope, but yeah, this is still my favorite in the testing that I've done so far. It has the Horus H59 reticle in the first focal plane, and we're going to talk about what makes that special here in a bit, but the H59 is a killer reticle, and of course the total build on this with its just excellent high level of glass and its perfectly reliable tracking. Yeah, highly recommended scope. But I was able to use this whole rifle overall in those challenges, get used to it, figure out that it was excellent, and that's really what gave me a lot of confidence on the day of the shoot. So here is the actual day of the shoot. We went out, and we had actually, the night before, tried to find some hogs out at night. We didn't have quite the right attractants or anything like that. We were just kind of sitting out there hoping something would come along. But then we woke up in the morning and started driving around in Billy's truck. And we we got to a point on one of the hilltops where Billy was looking out the window, and he called a stop, that he had seen something wandering around in the scrub brush. This is, we have a lot of scrub oaks out in Oklahoma. These things can, they're pretty brutal. It's almost like they're kind of spiky, and they grow to kind of short stature most of the time out in these fields. And he could see the hogs moving around in there. So we all quickly jumped out, and I was really glad that I had memorized my data, some of the data on this chart, because I had no time to reference it. I didn't even have time to break out a camera or anything. I just jumped out, got up on top of the top of the truck. Billy got on the hood. Cole got on the back with his rifle. And then that's when we all just kind of whispered to each other. And Billy took the first shot with the AR-15 that dropped that first piglet. It took them a little bit. They were kind of milling around, not quite sure what to do. And then we see them just trucking off to the left. They are just going hell for leather toward the horizon, off to the left. And, in my mind, I'm trying to, not only track along with them with this rifle, but I'm trying to, keep the data in mind. How big is the sow that's running along? I took a couple shots at some of the piglets first, but then I concentrated on this sow. And they were, going behind trees. There were all kinds of obstacles in the way that prevented me from actually seeing them. They would just kind of break out for a little while. I'd see them, I'd try to take some shots. And in the end, I took 3 shots on that sow. And here's the data that I had to work with. What was going through my mind while I was watching this all happen is I knew that at 400 yards, I was going to have a drop of exactly 2 milliradians, and then we didn't have any winds, so I was thankful for that. Early in the morning, no wind, so that was really nice. But if she was running at about 40 miles an hour at that distance, we're looking at a lead of about 8 milliradians. But she was quartering away a little bit, and I didn't think that she was going at the exact full speed that one can go. It seemed like maybe she was tempering her speed just a little bit for the piglets or something. Not exactly sure, but I did temper it, and I gave her a lead of about 4 milliradians. And that is where the Bushnell, or the H-59 reticle, the Horus H-59 in here with all of its data, all of its little dots, all of its little lines, that's where this shines. If you don't have time to dial up your elevation and figure out whatever lead or windage, using the dials, you have this great big Christmas tree of information. So if you have to make that quick shot, all you have to do is just adjust your view in the scope, lead the hog, give it the correct elevation, and then start taking your shots. So these were tracking shots, not trapping, where you're going to be kind of stuck in one spot, and then you wait for the animal to reach that spot before you take the shot. No, I was tracking along, and then put one of these, I shot one of these toward her. The first one, I believe, missed. The second one hit her kind of in the side. It didn't seem to break her stride at all. A lot of adrenaline going there. And then that last one just went right through the boiler room and took her down immediately. In my view, she kind of went behind a tree right after I took the shot, and I didn't see what happened. All I saw were the piglets continuing to go on toward the horizon, and I had to stop shooting at them because I could see some cows behind them kind of off in the background. But that last shot, when she disappeared, I had a pretty good idea that I had dropped her. And if you're wondering about the terminal ballistics of these bullets, these really do the job. Some others that you might take a look at, though, for very specific applications, and I hope to be able to test some of these in the future. We have the Speer Hot Core. These are 140 grain flat base spire point, and these should have very excellent terminal performance. They also performed very well as far as accuracy in this gun. This is the Hornady ELD. This is an ELD-M, not an ELD-X hunting bullet, but one of the ELD-X should work out really well and get really good ballistics. And then this right here, this is one that I also hope to test out against hogs here in the future. This is the Speer Gold Dot 140 grain. These have a pretty high ballistic coefficient for a bullet of its type. This has kind of a soft point going on. You can see a little bit of exposed lead right there at the tip. But even though this is designed basically as a hunting bullet, this is designed for defense, for hunting. This does have a very high ballistic coefficient. It shoots very well, as I've tested in this rifle. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to test that out here in the future. So when we went up, we were able to see the fallen sow. I had to go back to the truck and kind of point the guys toward where it had been. And when they found it, yeah, it looked like that shot had been just perfect. Just straight kind of through the shoulder, out through the side. It had just gone through all the vitals and dropped her immediately. I don't think there was any kind of activity afterward. I think she just immediately dropped. That was it, lights out. After the dust settled on this hunt and I had some time to really think about it, I came away with some final notes, a final takeaway on all this. First off, FFP rules, first focal plane. That is where your reticle is a little bit further forward in the tube and it actually gets magnified along with your kind of objective image as you roll zoom. So as you turn the zoom ring or pull the zoom lever right here, your reticle is going to stretch and shrink in your view so that it's always measuring the same angular measurement. If you have SFP, second focal plane, it's going to remain stationary in your field of view, and it's going to measure different things based on what your zoom is, which can have its own uses. There are definitely uses for SFP. I'm going to release a video that in which I really describe what I think about the two, but doing this hunt really pushed me over the top toward FFP for most uses. This was a case where if I had an SFP reticle, I don't know if I would have been able to make the shot. I don't think so. Because what I had to do with this rifle scope is back it off to 8x. I didn't realize it till afterward, but when we started shooting at 150 yards, I had to back off the zoom a little bit so that I could be ready to lead a moving target. And especially once recoil started, once I started firing, I knew that it was going to throw off my sight picture a little bit. I didn't know how much, but I knew I didn't want that full 21x that this scope can give you. So I rolled it back, and afterward I saw that I had rolled it back to 8x. So that's where I actually took the shot. And since the Horus H59 reticle was in the first focal plane, it didn't change its angular measurement as I zoomed it back out. And I was able to very precisely take that shot as listed in the ballistic chart. That's what made the shot happen. FFP rules, the Horus H59 rules, all those little dots and lines in the Christmas tree reticle, that's what really, that's one of the things that made the shot happen. If I were using a typical mil dot or mil hash reticle, I don't know that I could have done it. There was not time to dial anything onto the turrets. And it would have been much more difficult to try to hold off into the empty space kind of outside the reticle in order to take the shot. I've done that sort of thing before on stationary targets, but on a moving target, yeah, I don't know if I could have made that happen. So the H59 for the win. All that data really came into play in this very practical test. Add those two factors, and the total takeaway on the HDMR2 is that this scope is worth every penny. This is a phenomenally good scope. I just plain love it. Not only does it have very precise tracking and it has that wonderful reticle in the first focal plane, but one of the other things that I noticed afterward is that I hadn't had time to roll parallax or focus here on the side. One of the things that I would have normally done in a static shooting situation, since we started at 150 yards and we ended up at 400 yards, is I would have rolled parallax so that I could, accurately see my target, see it in focus, and make sure that the reticle wasn't skewed any. You can look up parallax on YouTube around here to see some of the effects that you can get. But looking through this scope, I totally forgot actually to mess with it because it never went out of focus. Part of that is because I was dialed back to 8x, that's going to help. But also, I've just noticed overall in the various challenges that the depth of field through this scope is extremely deep. So sometimes on some of the other challenges, I would also forget to roll parallax because I didn't perceive that I needed to. Everything was in focus. Somehow they have set this up so that you get a really good depth, which is going to be great for your hunting, or if you're doing tactical styles of shooting where you may have targets all over the place. Yeah, it's set up really well for that. Great scope. Take a good look at the review that I did a while back. Some of the other takeaways: the UTG Recon Flex worked very well. I knew that it was extremely stable, but one of the things that I was really curious about is how it would work if we were dealing with moving targets. You know, how well would this swing? Because it doesn't want to move. It doesn't want to flex or bend or anything. It's definitely not one that you can really pivot and track along with. And it can be a little bit slow to set up. But no, it worked out really well. I was able to track along pretty smoothly with my targets and take the shot. Another big takeaway: trust the computer, Luke. Don't trust your feelings. A lot of us are used to shooting with Kentucky windage, and over time, if we have one rifle that we're good with, yeah, maybe we can figure that out. But in my case, for a shot like this, I was very happy that I knew my ballistics. I was trusting the calculations. That's one of those other factors that made this work. And in this case, I was glad that I had actually memorized some of those, some of the data on there. Some other takeaways: the bullets worked, but I think there could be better options. You know, this did absolutely floor her. It probably tumbled through her and, you know, did some fragmentation. We didn't cut her apart to see, but you might get some better options like that spear and this one that I really want to test out, the Gold Dot. I think this is going to be a really neat bullet for a lot of shooters in the future. Another good one, okay, 6.5 Creedmoor overall for the win. Great cartridge. And then, of course, the rifle itself, the CMMG Mark III DTR2. It has all the precision that I needed. It has the speed, and it has quite a bit of comfort. I released a full review on this rifle and its whole build. Make sure you go check that out because I have a lot of data in there that I think could indicate to you if this is the sort of rifle you want. But overall, the whole thing stacked up really perfectly. The grip is a great angle, especially for the kind of shooting that we were doing. It's a little bit chunky in the hand, feels really good. And of course, the stock back here is extremely comfortable. You have the adjustable pieces on here so you can get it to match your own body dimensions. Overall, yeah, the rifle works very well, and it's well worth its relatively high price tag. Again, go check out the full review because this rifle is something very special on the market. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. Even if you didn't like this particular content, go ahead and subscribe. There's probably something coming that's more up your alley. Check out this playlist right here. This is going to have videos in a similar vein to what you just watched. These two videos we cherry-picked for you. And finally, The Social Regressive is on Patreon. So you can become a patron of the Destructive Arts and earn some goodies while helping us to provide high-quality videos just by kicking us a few bucks a month. Thanks a bunch for your patronage.